Have you ever had one of those moments when everything changes in the blink of an eye? 1 minute, you're living your ordinary life, sipping coffee and scrolling through your phone, and the next, you find yourself standing at the edge of a decision that could shatter everything you've ever known. That's exactly what happened to me one rainy afternoon in a small cafe, where a chance encounter flipped my world upside down and led me down a path I never thought I'd walk, a path of temptation, guilt, and betrayal. As I sit here, replaying every moment in my mind, I can't help but feel a storm of emotions crashing over me. My name is Jessica, and I used to think I had it all figured out. I had a steady job as a graphic designer, a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and a partner, Mark, who I believed was my forever. We'd been together for 6 years, building a life of shared dreams and quiet comfort. But as fate would have it, everything I held dear was about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. So, stick with me as I unravel this tangled mess of love, longing, and the choices that haunt me to this day. It all started on a dreary Tuesday afternoon in late October. The sky was a heavy gray, and rain pattered against the windows as I decided to take a break from my endless stream of deadlines. I headed to my favorite cafe, a little hole-in-the-wall spot called Brew and Muse on the corner of Maple Street. It was the kind of place that felt like a warm hug, dimly lit with mismatched furniture, the smell of freshly ground coffee beans, and cinnamon rolls wafting through the air. I ordered my usual vanilla latte and settled into a corner table by the window, intending to lose myself in a novel or maybe sketch a few ideas for a project. The rain outside created a soothing rhythm, and for a moment, I felt at peace. But that peace didn't last long. The bell above the door chimed, and in walked a man who seemed to carry a different kind of energy into the room. He was tall, with tousled dark hair and a leather jacket that looked like it had seen 1,000 stories. His name, I'd later learn, was Alex. As he scanned the room for a seat, our eyes met for just a split second, and I felt an inexplicable jolt, like a spark had ignited something dormant inside me. I quickly looked down at my book, my cheeks flushing, telling myself it was nothing. I was with Mark. I loved Mark. This was just a random moment, a fleeting glance. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I tried to focus on my book, but my eyes kept drifting to him as he ordered his coffee and took a seat a few tables away. There was something about the way he moved, the way he seemed so at ease with himself, that drew me in. I scolded myself for even noticing. I had a life, a good life, with Mark. We'd met in college during a late-night study session at the library, bonding over cheap pizza and shared dreams of making it big in our respective fields. He was my steady, my safe place. We'd moved in together 3 years ago, decorating our little apartment with thrift store finds and photos of our adventures. Sure, things had gotten a bit routine lately. Our conversations often revolved around bills, work, and what to make for dinner. But wasn't that just what long-term relationships were like? Still, as I sat there in the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Maybe it was the monotony of my days, the endless cycle of work and home, or maybe it was the way Mark and I had stopped really seeing each other. We were comfortable, but comfort can sometimes feel like a cage. And as I stole another glance at Alex, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years: excitement, curiosity, a pull toward the unknown. Over the next few weeks, I found myself returning to Brew and Muse more often than I cared to admit. At first, I told myself it was just for the coffee, the ambience, the escape from my tiny home office. But I knew the truth. I was hoping to see Alex again. And I did. He seemed to be a regular too, often sitting with a notebook, scribbling away or reading some worn paperback. One day, as I was reaching for a sugar packet at the counter, he struck up a conversation. It was casual, nothing more than a comment about the weather, but his voice, deep and warm, sent a shiver down my spine. We ended up talking for a few minutes about nothing in particular, and I found myself laughing at his dry humor, feeling lighter than I had in months. From there, our interactions grew. We'd chat whenever we bumped into each other at the cafe, starting with small talk about books and music, then diving deeper into our lives. I learned that Alex was a freelance writer, always chasing the next story, living a life that seemed so different from my structured routine. He'd traveled to places I'd only dreamed of: Morocco, Iceland, Japan, and his stories painted vivid pictures in my mind. I found myself opening up to him too, sharing things I hadn't even told Mark lately. I told him about my passion for art, how I'd once dreamed of being a painter before settling for a practical career in design. I confessed how trapped I sometimes felt, like I was living someone else's life. With every conversation, I felt a growing connection, a sense of being truly seen. Alex had this way of looking at me, like he could see past the surface, past the carefully curated version of myself I showed the world. It was intoxicating, and it scared me. I knew I was treading dangerous waters, but I couldn't stop myself from wading deeper. Each time I left the cafe, I'd feel a mix of exhilaration and guilt. I'd go home to Mark, who'd greet me with a tired smile and ask about my day, and I'd lie. Not outright, but by omission. I'd say I'd been working or running errands, never mentioning the hours spent talking to another man. The guilt gnawed at me, but so did the longing. I started noticing all the little things that had faded in my relationship with Mark. The way we rarely touched anymore. The way our evenings were spent in separate corners of the apartment. Him on his laptop, me on my phone. I missed the early days, when we'd stay up all night talking about everything and nothing, when a simple brush of his hand against mine would send my heart racing. Now, it felt like we were just going through the motions, two people sharing a space, but not a life. I tried to rekindle things with Mark. I suggested date nights, cooked his favorite meals, even planned a weekend getaway to a cabin in the mountains, a place we'd always talked about visiting. But even as we sat by the fire, sipping hot cocoa and watching the snow fall outside, I felt the distance between us. He was there, physically, but emotionally, we were miles apart. I caught myself wondering what Alex was doing, if he was at the cafe, if he was thinking about me too. The thought made my stomach twist with both excitement and shame. One night, after another failed attempt to connect with Mark, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. He was asleep beside me, his steady breathing a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I felt like I was splitting in two, one part of me clinging to the life I'd built with him, the other yearning for the freedom and passion I felt with Alex. I hated myself for even entertaining the thought, but I couldn't deny it anymore. I was falling for Alex, and it terrified me. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a rainy Friday, the kind of night that made you want to stay in with a blanket and a movie. But I felt restless, like I needed to escape the walls of my apartment, the weight of my thoughts. So, I told Mark I was meeting a friend for a quick coffee, another half-truth, and headed to Brew and Muse. When I walked in, I saw Alex at our usual table near the back, a small smile playing on his lips as he caught sight of me. My heart skipped a beat as I approached, feeling like I was stepping into a moment I couldn't turn back from. We talked for hours that night, the conversation flowing as easily as ever. We shared stories of our pasts, our fears, our dreams. He told me about a heartbreak that had shaped him, a relationship that had left him wary of love, but still hopeful. I found myself telling him about Mark, not by name, but as someone important, and how I felt torn between duty and desire. Alex listened without judgment, his eyes soft with understanding. As the cafe emptied out and the rain continued to pour outside, the air between us shifted. There was a tension, an unspoken pull that made my breath catch. I knew I should leave, go home to Mark, put an end to this before it went too far. But I stayed. And when Alex reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine, I didn't pull away. The touch was electric, sending a rush of warmth through me. He looked at me, his gaze intense, and I felt my resolve crumbling. When he leaned in, I didn't stop him. Our lips met in a tentative kiss, soft at first, then deepening with a hunger I hadn't felt in years. It was like a dam had broken, all the emotions I'd been holding back flooding out in that single moment. But as quickly as it happened, reality crashed over me. I pulled back, my heart pounding, my mind screaming at me. What had I done? I saw the confusion in Alex's eyes, the flicker of hurt as I stood up, mumbling an apology. I grabbed my coat and stumbled out into the rain, my thoughts a chaotic mess. The cold air hit my face like a slap, but it couldn't wash away the guilt that clung to me. I had crossed a line, betrayed Mark, betrayed myself. There was no undoing it. The days that followed were a blur of torment. I avoided Brew and Muse, terrified of facing Alex, of confronting what had happened. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office, trying to drown out my thoughts with endless tasks. But every quiet moment brought it all back. The memory of that kiss, the way it had felt so right and so wrong at the same time. I couldn't look at Mark without feeling like a fraud. He didn't know, but I did, and that was enough to make every smile, every touch, feel like a lie. I knew I had to tell him. Keeping this secret was eating me alive, but the thought of confessing filled me with dread. What if he left me? What if I lost everything we'd built? But I also couldn't keep pretending. So, one evening, as we sat on the couch watching some mindless TV show, I turned to him, my voice trembling. I told him everything. The cafe, Alex, the kiss. I watched as his face changed, the shock and pain etching lines into his expression. He didn't yell or storm out. He just sat there, silent, processing the weight of my betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost hollow. He asked why I hadn't talked to him, why I'd let it get this far. I didn't have a good answer. I told him I was lost, confused, that I still loved him but felt something missing. It wasn't enough. The hurt in his eyes cut deeper than any words could. We talked late into the night, tears streaming down my face as I tried to explain, to apologize, to make sense of my own actions. But some things can't be explained away. In the weeks that followed, we tried to navigate the wreckage. Mark didn't leave, but he wasn't fully there either. There were moments of tenderness, like when he'd hold my hand during a quiet moment, but they were fleeting, overshadowed by the unspoken tension between us. I moved into the guest room at his suggestion, giving him space to process. I wanted to fight for us, to rebuild the trust I'd shattered, but I didn't know how. Every day felt like walking on a tightrope, one wrong step away from falling. Then came the unexpected twist. One afternoon, as I was working from home, my phone buzzed with a text from Alex. He wanted to meet, to talk about what had happened. My heart raced as I read the message, a mix of fear and longing flooding my senses. I knew I should say no, cut ties completely, focus on repairing things with Mark. But a part of me needed closure, needed to face him one last time. So, I agreed to meet at a park a few blocks away, a neutral space where I hoped I could keep my emotions in check. When I saw Alex, sitting on a bench under a sprawling oak tree, my breath caught. He looked the same, yet different, more serious, less carefree. We talked, awkwardly at first, about mundane things before diving into the heart of it. He apologized if he'd pushed me into something I wasn't ready for, but he also admitted he felt something real between us. Hearing him say that stirred something in me, a flicker of the passion I'd felt that night. But it was also a reminder of the pain I'd caused. As we sat there, the autumn leaves falling around us, I felt a clarity I hadn't expected. I realized that I had changed through all of this. I wasn't the same Jessica who had walked into that cafe months ago, content to coast through life. I had tasted freedom, felt desire, but I'd also seen the cost of my choices. I had hurt Mark, maybe irreparably, and I couldn't ignore that. I told Alex I needed time, that I couldn't pursue anything with him right now, maybe ever. He nodded, understanding, though I saw the disappointment in his eyes. Walking away from that park, I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. I had closed a chapter with Alex, but my story with Mark was still unwritten. I didn't know if we could heal, if he could ever trust me again, or if I even deserved that chance. But I knew I had to try. I started therapy, something I'd always been skeptical of, to unpack my feelings, to understand why I'd strayed. I invited Mark to join me, hoping we could rebuild together, but he wasn't ready. Not yet. I also started reflecting on my own dreams, the ones I'd buried under years of practicality. I signed up for a painting class, something I hadn't done since college, and felt a spark of joy as I held a brush again. I began journaling, pouring my thoughts onto the page, trying to make sense of who I was and who I wanted to be. It wasn't a fix, but it was a start. I realized that part of my restlessness had come from within, from neglecting my own needs and desires. Maybe if I'd addressed that sooner, I wouldn't have sought it in someone else. As I sit here now, months after that fateful kiss, I find myself at a crossroads. Mark and I are still in limbo, living under the same roof, but not truly together. There are days when I see glimmers of hope, like when he laughs at an old inside joke, and days when the silence between us feels heavier than ever. I don't know if we'll make it, if love can survive a betrayal like this, or if we're just holding on to a past that's gone. And sometimes, late at night, I think of Alex, wondering what could have been if I'd chosen a different path. To anyone listening, I'm reaching out for your thoughts, your advice. How do you rebuild trust after it's been broken? Should I keep fighting for Mark, for the life we had, or is it time to let go and start anew, even if that means being alone? And how do I forgive myself for the pain I've caused? I'm filled with uncertainty, but I'm also learning to embrace it, to see it as a chance to grow. I know the future is mine to shape, but I can't help but wonder what it holds. What would you do in my shoes? How do we find our way back to love, or to ourselves, after we've strayed so far? I'm ready to face whatever comes next, but I'd love to hear your perspective as I navigate this messy, beautiful thing called life. As the months turned into a year, I continued to grapple with the aftermath of my choices. Therapy became a lifeline, a space where I could untangle the knots of guilt, longing, and self-doubt that had woven themselves into my life. I learned to confront the parts of myself I'd ignored for so long, the need for passion, for growth, for a life that felt truly mine. I also began to understand that my betrayal of Mark wasn't just about Alex. It was a symptom of a deeper unrest, a failure to communicate my needs and fears before they spiraled out of control. Mark and I remained in a fragile state, coexisting in our shared apartment with a cautious distance between us. There were small steps forward, shared meals where we'd talk about mundane things, a movie night where we laughed together for the first time in months. But trust, once broken, is a slow and painful thing to rebuild. I suggested couples therapy again, and this time, after much hesitation, Mark agreed. Sitting across from each other in that small, neutral office, we began to peel back the layers of hurt and resentment. It wasn't easy. There were sessions where we left in silence, the weight of our words too heavy to carry. But there were also moments of raw honesty, when Mark admitted he still loved me, but didn't know if he could ever fully forgive me, and when I confessed how much I feared losing him, even as I questioned if I deserved to keep him. Meanwhile, I stayed true to my decision to keep Alex out of my life. I didn't return to brew and muse, choosing instead to find new places to work and reflect. I focused on rediscovering myself through painting, filling canvases with bold strokes of color that mirrored the chaos and hope in my heart. I even started submitting my work to local galleries, and to my surprise, one of my pieces was accepted for a small exhibition. Standing in that gallery on opening night, watching strangers interpret my art, I felt a flicker of pride, a reminder that I was more than my mistakes, that I could create beauty even after causing pain. As for Mark, the turning point came unexpectedly one quiet evening. We were sitting on the couch, a familiar yet distant space, when he turned to me with a look I hadn't seen in a long time, vulnerable, searching. He told me he'd been thinking about our future, about whether we could truly move past what had happened. He said he didn't want to live in a relationship defined by resentment, but he also didn't want to give up on us without knowing we'd tried everything. His words weren't a promise of forgiveness, but they were an invitation to keep fighting. For the first time in months, I felt a genuine spark of hope, not just for us, but for the possibility of healing. We decided to take a leap of faith together. We planned a trip, not a grand getaway, but a simple weekend at the same mountain cabin we'd visited before everything fell apart. This time, there was no agenda, no pressure to fix things. We just wanted to see if we could find pieces of the people we used to be. Walking through the snowy trails, sitting by the fire with mugs of hot cocoa, we really talked, about our dreams, our fears, and the hurt we'd both carried. I told him how much I regretted my actions, not just for the pain they caused him, but for the way they'd fractured my own sense of self. He shared how betrayed he'd felt, but also how he'd started to see his own role in our drift, how he'd taken our comfort for granted, how he'd stopped asking me about my inner world. That weekend didn't magically erase the past, but it gave us a foundation to build on. Back home, we continued therapy, and slowly, we started to redefine our relationship. We set boundaries, made time for intentional connection, and worked on being honest even when it was hard. I moved back into our bedroom, a small but significant step, and though intimacy, both emotional and physical, remained tentative, it felt like we were inching towards something real again. A year and a half after that fateful kiss in the cafe, I can say that Mark and I are still together, though our love looks different now. It's not the carefree, idealistic bond of our early years, nor is it the stagnant routine we'd fallen into before everything unraveled. It's a love marked by scars, but also by resilience. We've learned that trust isn't just rebuilt, it's reimagined, forged through consistent effort and painful honesty. There are still days when doubt creeps in, when I catch a flicker of wariness in Mark's eyes or feel the weight of my own guilt. But there are also days filled with quiet joy, cooking dinner together, laughing over a shared memory, planning a future that feels possible again. I never saw Alex again after that day in the park, and I'm grateful for the closure I found there. I've come to see that my feelings for him were less about him as a person and more about what he represented, a longing for excitement, for a version of myself I'd lost touch with. I've worked to find that excitement within my own life, through art, through new friendships, through rediscovering my own passions. And in doing so, I've learned to forgive myself, not because I deserve it, but because holding on to shame only keeps me from growing. Looking back, I realize that my story isn't just about betrayal or redemption. It's about the messy, imperfect journey of being human. It's about learning that love, whether for a partner or for oneself, requires courage, vulnerability, and the willingness to face the consequences of our choices. Mark and I may never fully return to what we were, but we've built something new, something stronger in its fragility. And I've learned to live with uncertainty, to embrace it as a space for growth rather than fear. To anyone who's walked a similar path, I'd say this: healing is possible, but it's not linear. It's okay to stumble, to question, to feel lost. Rebuilding trust, whether with a partner or within yourself, takes time, patience, and a commitment to showing up, even on the hardest days. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is letting go of the past, not to forget it, but to make room for a future you can believe in. As I write this final chapter of my story, I'm sitting at my desk, a canvas drying in the corner of the room, Mark's laughter drifting in from the kitchen where he's attempting a new recipe. Outside, the world moves on, full of rainy afternoons and chance encounters, but I'm no longer afraid of what they might bring. I've learned to trust myself, to trust us, and to trust that whatever comes next, I'll face it with an open heart. Life is messy, beautiful, and unpredictable, and I'm ready for all of it.